Poschin b'chvod achsanya. I want to thank Yeshivat HaRav for this initiative and for the opportunity to share a few words of Torah with the broader yeshiva family. I think it's highly appropriate. I can still hear ringing in my ears so many years later, Rav Lichtenstein almost bellowing in one particular sicha about the significance of spreading Torah, disseminating Torah. The Gemara in Bava Metzia, where Rish Lakish was seeking out the various kvarim and ma'aros of the predecessors of Rabbanan who came before him, and he was unable to locate the precise coordinates of the Ma'ara of Reb Chia, and he had a Chalisha Sadas, and he wondered if he didn't quite measure up to Reb Chia, his illustrious predecessor, and the response came down, Torah kamo pilpalta, Torah kamo lo rivatzta. And that call towards Harbatzas HaTorah, of course, filtered through our Rosh Yeshiva Zatzal, continues to resonate in so many different ways, and even these briefer opportunities certainly fit into that paradigm. Speaking of the Rosh Yeshiva, I wanted to dedicate these remarks, of course, on the occasion of Rabbi Amital's 10th yahrzeit, which we marked just a few weeks ago, and use that as a prism, one, I think, hallmark on reflection, 10 years on, and almost really 2 decades on in terms of personal exposure to a hallmark of the thought of Rabbi Amital, through the lens of one particular halacha in Parashat Vaetchanan. I think Rav Amital, we would all agree, had a singular ability to synthesize a highly idealistic perspective on Avodat Hashem, calling L'tahir v'tahir libenu la'avdecha be'emes, the never-ending struggle to purify ourselves and our intentions in service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, on the one hand, with a highly realistic perspective on human nature, with respect to individuals and in society more broadly. The halacha in Parashat Vaetchanan, I think, captures this duality so beautifully, is the halacha of Lo Sisaveh. The introduction of Lo Sisaveh as a precursor to Lo Sachmod in the Aseret HaDibrot in Parashat Vaetchanan raises both questions of idealism as well as extreme practicality. Lo Sisaveh beis re'echa, sadehu avdo v'amaso, sharo v'chamoro, v'chol asher l're'echa. The Rambam paskins both in the Sefer Mitzvos, Reish Samach Vav, as well as Hilchos Gzela V'Aveda, Perek Aleph, based on Midrashei Chazal. Titaveh is Balev, whereas Lo Sachmod, and here we have the famous debate between the Rambam and the Ravid, Lo Sachmod has to result in the kinyan of the object. We know the Rambam paskins that there's no Malkos because it's a lav shein bo maisa, and the Ravid is apoplectic. Lo Raisi Tema Gadol Mizeh, you don't have a maisa that's Gadol, the kitas hachefetz in the end, and so the Ravid will tell you, and the chinuch will agree. Noteworthy that the chinuch will agree with the Ravid over the Rambam over this, that it can't be a lav shein bo maisa if Lo Sachmod has the result in terms of acquisition of the object, but there's not going to be malkos for other reasons. Lav shenitan lahishavon, right? It's basically like zela v'heshivis akzela. So be that as it may, Lo Sachmod certainly has an active component to the Rambam. The probable reason that there isn't Malkos, and this has been made famous by Rabbi Rosenzweig in terms of his approach to this issue, is that the mechayev is, of course, the obsession that develops in a person's heart, where they have to be maftzir v'reim and put extreme pressure on somebody to part with their object, and that is the essential mechayev of lo sachmod, that obsession. But we could all agree that there is a maisa component. In contrast, lo sisaveh is really balev, and that's exactly the language that the Rambam utilizes, both in the Sefer HaMitzvos, again based on Chazal, as well as in the Mishnah Torah. And so the Sisaveh relates directly to that point of personal refinement and inner refinement that Rav Amital was so classically known for, v'tahir libenu le'avdecha be'emes, to almost perform the impossible task of becoming the Ibn Ezra's, and he mentions this in the context of Lo Sachmod. We could say even more for Lo Sisaveh, the Ish Kfari, who, if something is against the halacha, for him it's at a greater distance and at a greater remove than the princess would be from the simple villager. V'tahir libenu le'avdecha be'emes, Lo Sisaveh, and its introduction into the Aseret HaDibrot in Parashat Vaetchanan raises the bar even further than Lo Sachmod would have it. But at the same time, it's striking to note that as idealistic as Lo Sisaveh is, going even beyond Lo Sachmod, it's an earlier phase in terms of developing an attachment to some material possession. the fact is that it's also rooted in a deeply realistic view of human nature. Taiva, maybe l'idei chimud, maybe l'idei gezel, maybe l'idei shvichos damim, as everybody knows, based on Achav and Kerem Navos, is that it's not just idealism per se, but it's an understanding that, of course, what starts in terms of Taiva Balev ends up in very different places, at very different levels of gravity. And so there, of course, is a deeply realistic, not just idealistic, but a highly realistic element that Lo Titaveh is trying to inject. Don't think that it will simply be a question of spiritual denigration. It may be that, and that's certainly not to be taken lightly, but Chazal, we're not saying as alarmists, but in terms of being realists, Taiva, maybe l'idei chimud, maybe l'idei gezel, maybe l'idei shvichos damim. We can even perhaps have a diuk in both the Rambam in the Sefer HaMitzvos as well as in the Mishnah Torah to support this analysis. It's very fascinating, especially if you understand that Taiva leads to chimud, which leads to perhaps gezel, which leads to shvichos damim, that Lo Titaveh is not presented first. If you look in the Lavin in the Sefer HaMitzvos, and first we have Reish Samach Hey, which is Lo Sachmod, and then we circle back, Reish Samach Vav, to Lo Titaveh. And the same basic structure is maintained in Perek Aleph of Hilchos Gzela Ve'Aveda. Lo Sachmod, and then Lo Titaveh. If it was the purely idealistic approach, you would simply start with Lo Titaveh. That develops earlier on, and then you would move on to graver stages. But ensconcing Lo Titaveh within a framework that already has a Maisa component to it, that is to say, that already is introduced Lo Sachmod, where you'll become so obsessed, where you'll have no choice but to acquire this object from that person, tells you that Lo Titaveh is not just pie in the sky, it's not just V'tahar libeinu l'avdecha be'emes, but it's actually very deeply rooted in an understanding that there are real-life consequences to the sentiments and the emotions which take hold in our hearts and shape our psychology. So just in the context of the 10th yahrzeit, great Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Amital Zatzal, may we all continue to strive both V'tahar libeinu l'avdecha be'emes, to purify our hearts for its own sake, but at the same time having a very grounded understanding, as Rav Lichtenstein might have said, Sulamu tavartza v'rosha magia shamayma, very grounded understanding that what starts balev often does not end balev, maybe successful in a broader sense, combining the avodah shebalev aspects of our Avodat Hashem with those that have more concrete expressions in the world around us. Thank you very much.